But again, a lot of clients doesn't aware that when you get an IPA from the banks, it's not definitely 100% that the banks will definitely grant you a loan later on as well. Some clients do not know their loan eligibility amount before they purchase a property. So I'm going to share with you today why is it important to secure a IPA or in principle approval. So I have a client that approached us to engage our service to help him to secure a mortgage loan. So he actually bought a private property in a very prime location in District 10, and he didn't actually get an in principle approval beforehand. And during the loan application, when we was applying, he was shocked to find out that because of his high credit card spending, right, it actually became an obstacle for him to get his full 75% loan, because he is actually an insurance agent, and which he charges his all his insurance premium to his credit card. And his credit card spending is averagely about 10 to 15K a month for the last few months. So because of this reason, the loan amount was actually so much lesser comparing to an individual whose credit card spending is only about $1,000 to $3,000 averagely. So we actually took a while longer to rectify his loan because of the high credit card spending. So what is an IPA? An IPA is to make sure that the banks actually grants you a X amount of loan before you actually purchase your property. So example, when you're applying an IPA or AIP with the banks, you will submit your necessary income documents for the banks to do a creditable check, your personal information like your IC, income tax, payslip, CPF contribution, for the bank to determine how much you can loan. So that is an IPA that you will be getting from the banks. Make sure when you get an IPA from the banks, they actually send you a formal email saying how much you can loan. But again, a lot of clients doesn't aware that when you get an IPA from the banks, it's not definitely 100% that the banks will definitely grant you a loan later on as well. Because if there's any changes in your commitment, example, you suddenly buy a car in between from the time you've gotten your IPA to the time you secure your option to purchase, example is a duration of 1 to 3 months or 6 months. And in between this period, if you went to purchase a car, that will actually affect your eligibility amount. So these are the small things that you need to take note of when you are buying a property. So if you are buying a property today, from the time you are going to give down the check, do not go to purchase another car. That will actually affect your loan eligibility, or maybe have very high credit card spending. So if you remember just now I was saying that one of our clients, he has a spending of 10 to 15K and he didn't did out IPA. That was a mistake he made. And we actually took quite a while to rectify because there are more documents required by the banks because of the high credit card spending. And the loan eligibility amount, his income was sufficient for 75%, but due to the high credit card spending, right, it actually dropped to about nearly 10%. Instead of 75% loan, they are only able to secure 65% due to the credit card spending. So this is the importance of getting a IPA or approved in principle from the banks before you purchase the property. So typically, IPA will actually valid for 30 days. After 30 days, let's say if you purchase in 2 to 3 months time, you will just need to refurnish some income documents or some updated documents required by the banks. So now you're all set to purchase your dream house. So you have already gotten your IPA. Next, what you need to make sure is on the valuation. So for valuation wise, right, for HDB, valuation is actually done by HDB themselves. So the agent can actually provide you some data on the past transaction for you to know the offer you're going in, is it above the market rate or at market rate. But what we saw from the recent booming for resale market on HDB and private, it has came to our attention that it's a COV. What is a COV? So it's cash over valuation. So imagine you are purchasing a HDB or private today. Example, the HDB asking price from the seller is 550K, but end day, the valuation report coming back from HDB is actually 500K. So that means the 50,000 is your cash over valuation. So this additional 50,000, it can be only paid using cash. Similarly, for a private property, recently we also saw a booming on that. But the good thing about for private property, usually if the amount is only $50,000 difference or maybe 70 to 80K, usually the banks are actually able to match the valuation based on the purchase price. Be it a private or HDB, we still do see cases that even for private property, the banks are unable to match if the valuation difference is about 100 to 200K. So that is a bit too far gap for the banks to actually match the valuation if there's no recent transaction to support it. Make sure that when you actually apply your loan, you have really checked on your valuation before giving the check as well. So after you have done these two checklists, you're all set to give your check. So how does the process or timeline look like? So for today, if you are buying a HDB, the exercise period is 21 days. Whereas a private is usually a 14 days which you need to exercise. So for a HDB, it's compulsory that you need a letter offer before you can exercise. But for a private, which a lot of people are not aware, so if you are getting a private property, technically at the point of exercise, you don't need the banks to approve the loan. But we will actually encourage that you make sure that the banks are able to grant you the loan before you exercise. Okay, so but for private, it's not a mandatory to have a letter offer before you exercise. So usually for a private property, right, the exercise period is actually 14 days. But a lot of buyers is not aware that you can actually negotiate on the timeline, because over the last few months, we also see that there's a new trend that a lot of our clients, what they do is that they actually stretch the exercise period. Instead of the standard 14 days, they go with, example, 21 days, or the longest so far I saw before is a 3 to 4 months period to exercise. Why? You must be thinking, why do you need such a long exercise period for your purchase? So one of the few common reasons we see nowadays why people are asking for a longer exercise period is, number one, they have not sold their existing property, okay? Or they are in the process of selling their existing property. So they want to make sure that they secure a new place before selling their existing property. So this is one of the particular reasons. If you are looking for a longer period of exercise period, the seller might request you to down pay instead of a standard 1%, maybe a 2 or 3% if you require a longer option period. So this is one thing you need to take note of. So technically, instead of the 1% down payment, the down payment will be 2 or 3%, okay, for you to stretch 2 or 3 months exercise period. But again, not necessarily all sellers will be agreeable to this point, because they might be also in the transition of buying, selling. So they need you to exercise before they can exercise their purchase of property as well. So it will be case-to-case basis depending on the timeline you require. Of course, you can always talk to your agent who is representing you to discuss on the timeline. Let them work it out if you have certain criteria in place. And after you exercise, usually the completion is 8 weeks. Again, if you need a longer completion period, it's also possible to negotiate on this part. So it can be shortened as short as 6 weeks, which we saw before, but we wouldn't recommend that because completion within 6 weeks is too tight. But it's still possible if you have the right bankers or us over at Keyquest Mortgage to help you manage the timeline. If not, if you need a longer, you can go up to 8 weeks, 10 or 12 weeks for completion period as well. So for additional tip for a seller, so if you are in the process of also buying, selling, and after completion, your new place, you might need time to do a renovation as well. So you can consider to negotiate with your buyer, which is buying your existing property, to actually rent back from them for a couple of months, example, a 2 to 3 months period for you to have a place to stay in the event that your new property you purchase, you actually require a renovation period. So after you have received your option to purchase, another important thing you need to do is to engage a lawyer which is actually in the bank's panel. So if you have not decided on which bank you are going for, it's better to get a law firm whereby they are actually in most of the major local banks as well as the foreign banks. So that in the event you're still undecisive on which interest rate package you want to go for or which bank, so getting a lawyer to act for you will be also crucial. So you need to make sure that the lawyers you are appointing is actually in the few banks we are applying for the loan as well. So the lawyers will actually act on your behalf for exercising the option to purchase, and subsequently, if you have a bridging loan, they will actually take care of the bridging loan process for you, releasing the payment to seller and getting the bridging loan from the banks. And lastly, towards the completion, they will actually draw down the loan from the banks and pass it to your seller. So a lawyer is also a very crucial person in the whole process, because they are going to handle from start to end, from your exercise, if you require bridging loan, to completion. So getting a good lawyer is definitely necessary, that they are familiar with all this. So if you are doing a back-to-back of buying as well as selling, sometimes your CPF proceeds might not come in on time for your next property purchase. So what you can do is actually to get a bridging loan. So a bridging loan is usually you can bridge up to a down payment of 20%. So for example, today if you are selling a property, example, the completion date is on the 15th of December, and your purchase completion is maybe a few days later, example 20th of December. But you have to take note, if you are using your CPF proceed for the completion on your next purchase, the timeline might not be sufficient, because from the day of your completion, it takes around 10 to 14 working days for the CPF to go back to your existing OA account, and the lawyers require some time to draw out and to use for your next purchase. So if your timeline of your selling completion is within the next 2 weeks, at times we will actually recommend to have a bridging loan as a standby in the event that your CPF proceeds is not coming in on time. Another reason why people will actually require a bridging loan is that for their next upcoming purchase, it is earlier than their selling. So that means some buyers or sellers, they actually time it that, okay, my purchase completion is actually earlier than my selling, so that I do not need to rent back from my buyer, and my CPF proceeds will be coming back on time, okay, that I can use a bridging loan to cover the gap even though my selling is not completed. So example, if your selling completion again is on 15, but your purchase completion is, example, on the 1st of December. So technically, you will actually require a bridging loan in this case. So for a bridging loan, you can actually get up to 6 months of period, okay, for a bridging loan. So if you are in the process of buying, selling, and you require a bridging loan, so you can actually stretch out to 6 months. But take note, in order to apply for a bridging loan, you need to have an exercise selling OTP before the banks will actually grant you a bridging loan. So these are the small things you need to take note of to manage your timeline within the time frame you want in terms of your buying as well as your selling. Thank you for watching this video. If you are still unsure of the whole process and you would like to speak to someone, okay, click on the link below. One of our relationship managers will be reaching out to you and share with you the timeline, the process, what needs to be done at which stage, so that when you purchase your property, it can be at ease. You don't need to be stressed over the whole loan application process and not knowing which bank has the best interest, bridging loan, all this, and the timeline. We can actually work with you on the timeline as well for your next property purchase.